I'm doing an arrangement of Pachelbel's canon at the moment for a wedding, um, and so I'm doing it on Ableton with some pretty good string samples that I got, and so I'd gotten the music and I'd played in the different parts, and it wasn't sounding great. It wasn't sounding very like strings, and I started kind of tinkering with the MIDI to try and make it sound more like strings, and I've had a few revelations. These are just some observations about how MIDI works and how these sample things work, and might be useful to some people who are thinking about doing this kind of thing, or just to try and appreciate. I have a friend who's doing film music at the moment, and he sends me some things where he's basically like transcribing the scores of these film like theme tunes into, you know, computer generated things on I think he uses Logic, but it's just kind of dawning on me how very intricate that work is, because the sample libraries are pretty good, right? So what they've done, this one I have, I think it's the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and they get the string players to play at all different volumes, right? So they record them at all these different volumes, and then they can construct the samples. So whenever I play on my keyboard, the keyboard is connected to MIDI, and the MIDI interface is able to sense the velocity at which I play, right? So velocity is basically how hard you press the key, right? And you know, the clue is that what is actually what we translate as hard, like forceful playing, is actually fast depression of the key, right? If you press the key fast, say on a piano, which is what this is modeled after, obviously, the hammer quickly hits the string, and that fast force translates into volume. So, but if you press slowly, the hammer connects slowly with the string, and you get a soft sound. So that velocity is what the MIDI keyboard is actually able to sense, right? So how does that translate to strings? It's very, very different actually. So I played in the parts, and I'm playing the notes. I'm navigating a keyboard to play those notes, right? So my hand has a certain weight to it, right? The notes with my thumb are a little heavier than the others, and depending on if it's an awkward jump, I might land like heavily just because of the physicality of doing that. And whereas on a piano, where the sound dies away with every note, right? The piano can't sustain like that truly like a string instrument can. So a string player plays with their bow, and they're able to sustain the same pitch, or the same intensity of the note, same volume, for a long time, right? Piano player can't do that. There's the pedal, of course, but that's a different thing. So a lot of what makes string parts sound distinctive is that they don't have that same fluctuation in velocity that a keyboard player necessarily brings, right? So, because rather than playing with lots of individual strikes, if you like, a string player is able to play with the bow at a fairly even pace and move the fingers of their left hand on the fingerboard, and the notes change. So how does that translate to MIDI? Is that, so I went in, and you're able to see all the velocities, right? They're like little poppies, right? Little little heads, little circular heads with a little stalk, and you're able to see, and they're really like all up and down all over the place, reflecting the percussive nature of playing on a keyboard. So, and just to go back to what I was saying about these players who record these samples, right? They're asked to record all these different things, and they create a sample library then for each note effectively, right? So they'll decide, right, at the note D, right? Any particular note, doesn't matter, but say the note D, between velocities 0 and 50, we're going to use that sample when they played softly, right? And obviously they model it, but basically this is roughly the idea. And then between, you know, velocities 50 and 90, we'll use a recording, a sample of when that violin player played a little harder, you know, a little lighter. And then at the very top, the top of the range is 127. At that highest volume, that's when we use the sample, right? So what that means is that if I'm coming along and I'm playing with all the different velocities that my hand does when I'm unthinkingly playing the notes in, I get all these different velocities. And what I found was, here's the tip, if I evened out the velocities, I got a really good sounding authentic string sound. So like for a scale, on the piano, you're playing, you move your hand, you move your thumb comes in, you get kind of spikes in that, right? And because of the nature of the piano, the instrument, it's kind of disguised. But so I found that if I just leveled out those velocities, I got the part of the sample that was the same, right? So it's the same intensity of playing, so it sounds really, really good. Oh, there's a guy walking past with a violin case. Serendipity. So yeah. And then the other thing I noticed, and I got into it a little bit, and there's a bit in Pachelbel's canon where it goes dum da da dum da da dum, and it kind of goes low and high, and there's articulation written into the score where you've got like a staccato, and then some notes under a slur, right? So, and I was using what little knowledge I have of string players, and I use the up and down bows, and the down bow will be a kind of a heavier sound than the up bow, generally. So I was kind of trying to imagine what would the bowing be. I don't know how to play the violin, but you know, even physically, how would you go? Da da dum 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 da da dum dum dum. So I was thinking. So I had that little rhythm. So da 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 da, and the da 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 da. I decided that would be the down bow. The da 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 da. And I would have the same velocity for those la da da, those fast little notes, and then the one before the down bow, I was imagining, okay, maybe that's an up bow, but it's slightly more played slightly harder than the three together. So I was going. So the highest velocity was the down bow that I was imagining, da, and then up bow, la da da. So those are the same because I'm using an up bow, same intensity, da da da. But they're all the same, so they get the same sound. So, but slightly less velocity, right? So I had those at about 80, and then I had the joining note. So I've got heavy. I had 108. I had bum, and then 80, da da da, and then I had 100, and then back to my 108 again. So I've got this kind of quite consistent pattern that is more like what a string player would do. A string player learns the feeling, and that's really what articulation is. It's being able to consistently deliver the physicality required to get that sound. And of course, the staccato means that the note is short, right? So on the piano, I found when I played it in, some of the notes that felt like I was playing staccato were actually quite long when they were translated into string sounds, where of course the note doesn't taper like it does on the piano. So when you play on the piano, because the note dies away almost instantaneously, or it begins to die away, it can feel more staccato, even though it's a longer note. Whereas on a string instrument, you've really got to stop the sound, because if you don't stop the sound is not short, right? So they've really got to, it's really got to be short. So you can control the duration of the notes. You can drag it, and so I found when I manually shortened all those, the staccato sounded much more authentic. And then the last thing I observed was there's a couple of points where I'd done a trill, and of course on the piano, you do a trill, right? You're moving between two notes, and again, because the note begins to die away immediately, what we hear on the piano is the impact, when your fingers go down, right? That we're hearing the kind of fresh strikes, if you like. So I kind of evened those out, and it sounded better. When I done it on the piano, they were quite uneven, and I evened them out, and it sounded way better. They still didn't sound right. And then I realized on the piano, you can, because you're almost like triggering the notes when you play the keys, but one note could be slightly held over, your finger stays down as you do the next one, right? Because you try and play it smoothly on the piano. That means kind of, the fingers would slightly, one would stay down while the next one, you get this kind of, right, this kind of thing. They're not precisely coming up and down at the same time. Maybe they should be. I worked on my trill technique, but anyway, but that's what I found. I'd done the trills, and they slightly overlapped. But of course, on the string instrument, you're playing one string, you're changing the fingers of the left hand, so the notes, the pitches, will actually physically never coexist like they can do on the piano, right? You can hold down two keys beside each other on the piano, and on the trill they were slightly overlapping. But of course, on a string instrument, that's a physical impossibility. So that's why it didn't sound right. It didn't sound authentic. So what I had to do then was to make sure that the notes didn't overlap at all, and then I got a much more authentic sounding trill. So yeah, those are just some thoughts, and yeah, I'll put up my arrangement if I ever get done. Stop procrastinating. Okay, bye.